Imagine you're walking down a crowded hospital corridor where the sharp scent of antiseptic mingles with the soft moans of unnamed pain. The flickering fluorescent lights cast a dim glow on walls stained by time. Patients huddle together, their weary eyes brushing past you, and somewhere, a child's cry pierces the air, sharp as a blade. You hurry along, your mind a tangle of thoughts, when suddenly your foot slips on a wet patch of floor. You stumble, heart pounding, barely catching yourself. A voice rises, gentle but laced with apology. "Careful, the floor's just been cleaned." You turn, ready to snap a retort, but the eyes of the woman before you stop you cold. Petite, dressed in a faded blue uniform, her calloused hands grip a broom tightly. Something in her voice, in the way she bows her head, makes your heart falter. You've never met her, so why does this feel so familiar? As if a forgotten piece of memory is clawing its way up from the depths of your soul. This is the fateful moment Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, experienced at Yelgado Ouedraogo Hospital in Ouagadougou. One morning he abandoned stifling meeting rooms and his entourage to step into the raw reality of his people, a world of pain, hope, and hidden stories. He never expected that, in a corner of that hospital corridor, an unassuming woman, a janitor with weathered hands, would unravel his understanding of power, family, and himself. That woman, Aminata, was no stranger. She was his adoptive mother, the one who held him close when the world turned its back, who sang him to sleep through the long nights of his orphaned childhood. But how could a president, standing at the pinnacle of power, forget the woman who was once his entire sky? And what happens when that buried past returns, demanding to be remembered? This story is more than a reunion. It's a reminder that love, though dusted by time, always finds a way back. As I've written in books like My Sister's Keeper and The Pact, I believe that unexpected moments, a glance, a voice, a memory, can shatter the walls we build around our hearts. Ibrahim and Aminata, in that destined moment, didn't just find each other again. They opened a larger story, one of silent women, unnamed mothers, and the power of gratitude in a divided world. Have you ever wondered who was the one who caught you when you fell? And if fate gave you a chance to meet them again, what would you do to say thank you? Step into this story, because it's not just Ibrahim and Aminata's. It could be yours. On an early morning in Ouagadougou, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through dusty trees, Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, stood at the door of his office, holding a cup of cold coffee. Outside, his entourage bustled, preparing for a day packed with meetings with ministers, diplomats, and dry reports on economics and security. But today, something stirred within him, a restless feeling, as if his heart whispered that he needed to step out, to touch the reality of the people he'd sworn to serve. In a sudden decision, he turned to his chief of staff, who was flipping through a schedule with a tense expression, and said, "Cancel my morning meetings. I want to go to Yelgado Ouedraogo Hospital, now." The chief of staff, stunned, tried to protest, but Ibrahim's resolute gaze silenced him. "A president," Ibrahim said, his voice low but powerful, "must see the truth with his own eyes. How can I make the right decisions if I only sit in an office reading reports?" This wasn't just an impulsive act. It was a silent declaration of war against the isolation that power imposes. At 30, Ibrahim was a symbol of change in a nation torn by political instability, poverty, and unhealed wounds from its colonial past. He stepped onto the stage of power with a promise to bring hope, but he knew that power, no matter how great, was never a perfect shield. It could hide scars, but it couldn't erase them. Ibrahim's scars weren't from battlefield wounds, but from gaps in his memory. A childhood orphaned, a mother lost, and fragments of a past he'd never had the chance to piece together. As he climbed into a simple car with just 2 quiet bodyguards and headed to the hospital, he wasn't only seeking his people's reality, he was searching for himself. Yelgado Ouedraogo Hospital loomed like a stark portrait of reality, where the limits of a developing nation were laid bare. The corridors were packed, patients crowded on rough wooden benches, some sprawled on the floor, clutching their pain in silence. The smell of antiseptic mixed with sweat and despair. Antiquated medical machines whirred and groaned, as if complaining about their overstretched lifespans. Nurses, their faces etched with exhaustion, yet holding on to faint smiles, moved like ghosts in an endless play. Ibrahim, dressed in a simple traditional Burkinabe shirt, no insignia, no ceremony, walked among the crowd. Some recognized him, their eyes lighting up with a mix of surprise and joy. "Is that the president?" A mother cradling a feverish child whispered, her voice trembling. Others, too consumed by their suffering, didn't notice the man quietly observing. He stopped often, kneeling to speak with a mother holding her sick child, her eyes red with worry. He clasped the hand of an elderly man, who teared up upon recognizing the president. "We believe in you," the old man said, his voice frail but hopeful. "We know you'll do great things." Ibrahim smiled, offering words of comfort. "We're trying. Things will get better." But inside, a storm was brewing. The peeling walls, the dripping ceiling, the outdated equipment, all were silent accusations. This was the reality his people faced daily. This was the burden he, as president, carried. But more than that, it was a reminder that his power, however vast, couldn't hide the truth. He was still human, with his own wounds and desires. In the books I've written, from Perfect Match to Handle with Care, I've always believed that power is never the final answer. It can open doors, but only the heart can step through. In that moment, Ibrahim wasn't the president of a nation. He was a man facing the fragility of life, grappling with questions no office could answer. Like Nina Frost in Perfect Match, who abandoned professional ethics to protect her son, Ibrahim broke the conventional rules of leadership by visiting the hospital unannounced. This was a form of rebellion, not against external enemies but against the isolation power imposed on him. He refused to be a king on a throne, receiving filtered information through advisors. Instead, he chose to step down, to touch trembling hands, to hear untold stories. But Yalga Hospital wasn't just a place for Ibrahim to witness his people's struggles. It was a mirror reflecting himself, a man carrying the wounds of his past. As he walked through the crowded corridors, he didn't just see patients and nurses. He saw fragments of himself. A boy who lost his mother, a child swept into the whirlwind of tradition and change. His decision to visit the hospital, therefore, wasn't just political. It was personal, an effort to reconnect with what made him who he was. In The Pact, I wrote about how characters face moral choices to protect those they love. For Ibrahim, choosing to leave his office for the hospital was a moral decision, not just for his people's sake, but for his own soul. The moment he nearly slipped on the wet floor, when Aminata's voice rang out, was the intersection of power and vulnerability. Aminata, in her faded uniform and calloused hands, embodied the women society forgets, the silent workers, the unnamed mothers, the ones who keep the world turning without recognition. To Ibrahim, she was just a janitor, but her voice, her posture, sparked a familiarity he couldn't explain. It was the moment when his power, with all its glory and responsibility, paled before the strength of memory and human connection. The story of Ibrahim and Aminata, then, isn't just about a president and a janitor. It's about how we, no matter our position, yearn to be seen, understood, and tied to those who shaped us. As Ibrahim Traoré moved through the narrow corridors of Yalgado, Ouédraogo Hospital, he wasn't just seeing crowded patients or peeling walls. He was navigating a labyrinth of memory where every corner might hide a piece of his past. Amid the bustle, nurses rushing, patients waiting, names called over the intercom, a sudden moment stopped time. His foot slipped on a wet patch, his body lurched, and a voice rose, soft but apologetic. "Careful, the floor's just been cleaned." He turned, ready to respond, but the woman's eyes halted him. She stood there, small in her faded blue uniform, her rough hands clutching a broom, her head bowed as if to avoid his gaze. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice trembling, as if fearing she'd committed an unforgivable mistake. Ibrahim smiled, replying with kindness, "It's fine, ma'am. I wasn't watching my step." He meant to move on, to continue his tour, but a strange sensation stirred, like a shiver down his spine. Her voice, her stance, felt achingly familiar, as if a locked door in his mind had cracked open, revealing faint glimmers of a forgotten past. "Aminata," she answered when he unexpectedly asked her name, her voice soft but clear. Her name, common in Burkina Faso, should have been a passing detail, but to Abraham it rang like a distant bell, stirring memories he thought were buried. He stood frozen as the doctor leading the tour urged him to move on. "We should continue, Mr. President," the doctor said, his voice tinged with concern. But Ibrahim didn't hear. He saw only her, Aminata, with her weathered hands, her face half hidden under a traditional headscarf, and a strange certainty that he'd known her, belonged to her. "Thank you, Aminata," he said, his voice trembling, unable to explain the emotion surging within. He resumed his tour, but his mind was elsewhere. Aminata's image clung to him, a puzzle without an answer, a piece of memory demanding its place. In the books I've written, from My Sister's Keeper to Sing You Home, I've always believed memory is a double-edged sword. It can heal, but it can also wound. For Ibrahim, meeting Aminata was such a cut. She wasn't just a hospital janitor. She was the embodiment of a past he'd been forced to forget. Aminata, with 23 years of tireless work at Yalgado, symbolized the invisible women of society. The cleaners sweeping corridors, the mothers nurturing without titles, the widows quietly carrying life's burdens. They keep the world turning, yet are rarely seen, rarely named. In Sing You Home, I told of Zoe, a woman fighting for her identity in a prejudiced world. Aminata, too, had no stage to tell her story. She had only her broom, her bucket, and a heart that loved without expecting return. Why did Ibrahim forget Aminata? This question haunts me, as it does the characters in my books who face voids in their souls. Was it because he was so young when torn from her, just 5 when his birth mother Fatma died? Or because the adults around him, his uncle, his father's family, decided a boy must be raised in a proper environment, not by a widowed woman with no power? In My Sister's Keeper, I explored how families can both shape and erase parts of us. For Ibrahim, memories of Aminata were buried under time's dust, adult decisions, and a society stratified by class. Aminata wasn't just forgotten by him, she was forgotten by society. Her work, though essential, was never deemed important. Her love for Ibrahim, though profound, was never acknowledged as part of his family's story. But memory, as I often write, has its own way of returning. For Ibrahim, it came back through small details. Aminata's voice, her posture, the way her eyes avoided his as if afraid to intrude. These weren't just personal, they were bridges to a broader community, to women like Aminata who nurtured, cared, and sacrificed without expecting reward. In that moment when he paused to ask her name, Ibrahim did what society rarely does. He saw her. Everyone somewhere else has endured things you wouldn't even imagine. That simple act, a question, a glance, was revolutionary, challenging the notion that people like Aminata are invisible, that their stories don't matter. In The Pact, I wrote of the power of small moments, seemingly trivial choices that can alter a destiny. For Ibrahim, choosing to pause, to listen, was the first step in reclaiming a lost piece of himself. Aminata, in her simplicity and humility, embodied values society often overlooks: compassion, resilience, and unconditional love. She worked 23 years in that hospital, cleaning corridors, trodden by thousands daily, yet no one stopped to ask her name. She loved Ibrahim as her own, singing to him, healing his wounds, yet no one recognized her role in his life. To society, she was just a janitor, a widow, a woman with nothing to mark her presence. But to Ibrahim in that moment, she was everything. She was the one who'd been his sky, who'd kept him steady when his world collapsed. And now, as he stood before her, with a president's power but a child's heart, he began to remember. In the depot neighborhood of Ouagadougou, where dusty red roads snake through modest concrete homes, Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of an unmarked car. No sirens, no entourage, just a driver and a silent bodyguard. He wore a plain shirt, his shoes dusted red from the path, and in his heart was a mix of anticipation and unease. Today, he didn't come as a president, he came as a son, a man seeking answers to the gaps in his memory. Aminata's house sat humbly in the neighborhood, its pale yellow walls faded, a small yard with laundry swaying in the morning breeze. A young woman, Fatou, washed dishes by an outdoor tap, freezing when she recognized him. "I'm looking for Madame Aminata," Ibrahim said, his voice gentle but firm. Speechless, Fatou pointed to a slightly open door. He nodded thanks, took a deep breath and stepped inside. Inside Aminata's small home was a world of simplicity and dignity. Colorful fabrics draped over chairs, framed family photos hung on the walls, and the faint scent of herbal tea filled the air. Aminata sat by the window in a traditional outfit with blue and ochre patterns, her face calm as if she'd anticipated this visit. "I was expecting you," she said, her voice soft but certain, then rose to pour tea with slow, graceful hands. Ibrahim sat across from her, and in that moment every distance between them, power, status, time, seemed to dissolve. The sounds of children playing outside, motorbikes in the distance, faded into a soft backdrop. There were only two people, a mother and a son, reconnected by the invisible thread of love. "Aminata," Ibrahim broke the silence, his voice trembling with emotion. "Since yesterday, I can't stop thinking about you. There's something in your face, your voice, like a memory I can't reach." Aminata smiled, a smile tinged with the sorrow of years gone by. "Children often forget," she said softly, "but the heart sometimes remembers what the mind lets go." She stood, walked to an old wooden dresser, and pulled out a small wooden box. From it she took a bracelet of colorful beads and cowrie shells, its edges worn by time. "You wore this on your wrist," she whispered, her voice catching. "Your mother, Fatima, had it blessed by the village marabout to protect you." Ibrahim took the bracelet, his hands shaking as if holding something sacred. Suddenly memories flooded back, young Ibrahim playing with the beads, counting them to fall asleep, the safety of a woman's warm hand stroking his hair. "How do you have this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Aminata took a deep breath, as if preparing to open a door she had long kept locked. "When your mother, Fatima, fell gravely ill, I was her closest neighbor and friend. I'd lost my husband the year before, and we leaned on each other in hard times. When she knew her end was near, she took my hand and begged me to care for you." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her voice held steady. "For nearly 2 years, I raised you as my own. I cooked for you, washed your clothes, told you stories at night to help you sleep. You called me Mama Nina because you couldn't say my full name." Ibrahim felt his heart stop. "Mama Nina," he repeated, and like magic the door of memory swung wide. He remembered her warm laugh, how she carried him on her shoulders, taught him bird names, brewed bitter herbal teas for his fevers. "I remember you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I remember you, Mama Nina. In the books I've written, From the Pact to Handle with Care, I've always believed healing comes not from grand gestures but from moments of listening and understanding. The meeting in Aminata's small home was such a moment. In that simple room with its colored fabrics and tea-scented air, Ibrahim and Aminata were no longer president and janitor, they were mother and son, reunited by a love that had crossed time and distance. When Aminata gave Ibrahim the bracelet, she didn't just hand him an object. She gave him back his childhood, the days he called her mother, the nights she sang to soothe his fears. This scene recalls the pact, where characters face complex moral choices to protect those they love. Ibrahim, with his power, could have easily repaid Aminata with money or prestige, but he chose a subtler path. He sat there, listening, letting her recount the story of his birth mother, of their days together in Kuogo. The healing wasn't just between them, it rippled out to a forgotten community. Aminata, in her simplicity, represented millions of women who've raised children not their own, mothers without titles, women society deems invisible. Her love for Ibrahim was a quiet act of courage, transcending biological boundaries. In plain truth, I explored how family is defined not by blood, but by moments of care and love. Aminata gave Ibrahim a home when he'd lost everything, and though torn from him by family tradition, she kept that love alive, silently following his journey from afar as he became a soldier, then president. But what moves me most is how Ibrahim responded to that love. He didn't impose top-down generosity or turn Aminata into a political symbol. Instead, he came to her home to learn about his birth mother, himself, the values she'd instilled in him. He asked about old stories, the smell of village meals, the lullabies she sang. Each question was a bridge to his past, each answer a brick rebuilding his house of memory. In My Sister's Keeper, I wrote of how small choices can reshape a family. For Ibrahim, choosing to visit Aminata, to sit and listen, was a healing act not just for him, but for her. A woman who'd lived decades with the pain of separation. This meeting wasn't just a reunion. It was a declaration that love, though forgotten, always finds its way back. As Ibrahim hugged Aminata before leaving, her scent, a mix of shea butter and incense, carried him back to days of safety and love. He left that house not just with memories, but with a commitment. He would not let Aminata or women like her remain invisible. Their healing journey, then, isn't just the story of two people. It's a reminder that we all owe those who've lifted us, and that recognition, however late, can mend the deepest wounds. 3 weeks after that fateful meeting in the Depot neighborhood's small home, an official car quietly pulled up to Aminata and Fatu's new residence in a peaceful Ouagadougou suburb. The new house wasn't extravagant, but offered comfort and dignity to a woman who'd spent her life in quiet labor. Aminata, dressed in a vibrant traditional outfit with green and gold patterns of Burkina Faso, stepped out, her hands trembling slightly as she saw the car. Fatu, her niece, with a radiant smile, held her hand, whispering, "Don't worry, Auntie. I'm sure it's a good surprise." The driver, with a respectful nod, opened the door and said, "Madam, the President is waiting for you at the Presidential Palace." Aminata, accustomed to the simplicity of hospital corridors, felt her heart race. A woman like her, who'd once thought herself a mere shadow in life's current, was now invited to the nation's seat of power. But as she stepped into the car, her eyes held not fear, but the resolve of someone who'd lived with quiet pride. At the Presidential Palace, the scene was a stark contrast to Depou's dusty streets. Marble corridors gleamed, walls bore Burkina Faso's flag, and the air buzzed with the formality of a grand event. As Aminata and Fatu entered the reception hall, they were overwhelmed by ministers in crisp suits, journalists with flashing cameras, and familiar faces from their past. Among the crowd, Aminata spotted friends from Kouogo, former hospital colleagues, and even the old marabout who'd blessed young Ibrahim's beaded bracelet. The room hummed with anticipation, but when Ibrahim Traoré appeared, silence fell. He approached Aminata, taking her hands with a tenderness rare in a leader. "Don't be afraid, Mama Nina," he said softly, using her childhood nickname publicly for the first time. "Today's a special day." Ibrahim led Aminata to an honored seat at the center, and as she sat, her eyes scanned the room, shy yet proud. National television cameras broadcast live, carrying the moment to millions across Burkina Faso. Ibrahim stepped to the podium, his eyes alight with rare sincerity. "People of Burkina Faso," he began, his voice clear and emotional. "I invited you here today not to discuss politics or economics. I want to speak of a debt, a personal and national debt." He turned to Aminata, who fought back tears. "This woman, Madame Aminata Ouedraogo, was my second mother. When my birth mother, Fatima, fell gravely ill, she cared for me, raised me, loved me as her own. Then life tore us apart. But fate brought us back together, unexpectedly, at Ouagadougou Hospital, where she worked silently for nearly 25 years. The room stirred, the story touching hearts. Ibrahim continued, his voice lowering, but resolute. "For nearly a quarter century, Madame Aminata worked as a janitor, living simply with dignity and strength. She never asked for anything, not even when I became president. It's her humility, her vast heart, that I wish to honor today, not just for her, but for all the unsung women across our nation who nurture, support, and build our future in silence." He held up a plaque engraved with Aminata's name, bearing words honoring her maternal love and quiet service to the nation. Then he handed her the keys to her new home and a document ensuring a lifetime pension. But he wasn't done. With eyes ablaze, he declared, "In honor of Madame Aminata and all official or unofficial adoptive mothers, I announce the creation of the Root of the Heart Foundation. This organization will support women caring for orphans or children in hardship, providing resources, funds, and public recognition for their vital role in our society." The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing like a pledge that women like Aminata would no longer be invisible. But the most moving moment came when Ibrahim invited Aminata to speak. She rose, slowly adjusting her traditional headscarf with quiet pride. her eyes sweeping from high officials to her village friends. At the microphone she hesitated, her voice trembling. "I don't have the words of educated people. I only want to say that love has no limits. When I cared for young Ibrahim, I didn't think of the future, didn't imagine he'd become president. I just loved a child who needed love." She paused, searching for words, then continued with growing confidence. "In our villages, we say it takes a whole village to raise a child. Every woman who helps raise a child not her own is part of that tradition. I didn't do anything special. I followed the path of our ancestors." Then she looked at Ibrahim, her smile radiant. "I never stopped believing God would let me see my son again. Today, my heart is full of joy. May God bless our president and our country." Aminata's words, simple yet profound, were like a stone dropped into a still lake, sending ripples far and wide. The ceremony, broadcast live on national television, touched the hearts of millions in Burkina Faso. Within hours, the story of Ibrahim and Aminata spread across the nation, then beyond, shared by international news as a symbol of African family values, communal love, and respect for elders. But what moves me most, writing this in my own style, is how a personal act, Ibrahim and Aminata's reunion, became a catalyst for a social movement. In Handle with Care, I explored how small choices can ripple through a community. For Ibrahim, choosing to honor Aminata wasn't just personal gratitude, it was a call to reshape how society sees silent women, the cleaners, the foster mothers, the widows, who hold society together without recognition. The Root of the Heart Foundation, named for the unseen roots that nourish, became a beacon of inspiration. Within days of the ceremony, it received waves of donations and offers of support from across the country. Women from remote villages to urban slums began sharing their stories of children they'd raised, sacrifices they'd endured, dreams they'd set aside for others' futures. A network of care and support was born, offering not just material resources but something more precious: recognition. In the pact, I wrote of the power of public acknowledgement when a marginalized person is placed at the center. When Ibrahim brought Aminata to the stage, called her Mama Nina before the nation, he didn't just honor her, he placed her on equal footing with himself, dismantling the invisible barriers of class and status. In a society steeped in hierarchy, this was a revolutionary act, declaring that a person's value lies not in titles, but in their heart. The story of Ibrahim and Aminata, then, isn't just about a mother and son. It's a reminder that we all owe those who've lifted us, and that recognition, even if late, can transform a community. In plain truth, I explored how a simple truth can illuminate life's complexities. For Ibrahim, establishing the Root of the Heart Foundation was his way of turning Aminata's love into a legacy, not just for her, but for thousands of women. Have you ever paused to think of those who shaped you? Those who caught your tears, believed in you when you doubted yourself? And if given the chance, what would you do to ensure their story is told? This story, like my books, doesn't promise a perfect world, but it promises hope, that love and gratitude, when acknowledged and shared, can plant seeds for change beyond our wildest dreams. Under the ancient baobab tree in Kuoga, its gnarled branches stretching like arms embracing the sky, Ibrahim Traoré and Aminata sat together on a hand-woven mat, surrounded by the clear laughter of children playing in the arid fields. The sunset painted the land gold, casting a gentle glow on thatched roofs, as if whispering tales of generations past. Ibrahim, in a simple linen shirt, was no longer a nation's president, but a son returning to his roots. Beside him, Aminata, her headscarf a deep ochre, hands folded in her lap, smiled at the children chasing each other through the grass. A soft breeze carried the scent of red earth and wildflowers, a reminder that here, in the simplicity of the village, their hearts once beat as one. "Mama Nina," Ibrahim said, his voice warm, "do you remember the last time we sat under this tree?" Aminata laughed, a laugh laced with both joy and the sorrow of years gone by. "You were only as tall as my knee," she replied, her eyes sparkling with memory. "You kept asking me to tell you about the stars, and I had to make up all sorts of stories to get you to sleep." They laughed, their voices blending with the bird song in the branches, and in that moment time seemed to stand still. Kuogo wasn't just a village, it was part of them, where Ibrahim's birth mother, Fatima, once sang under the moonlight, where Aminata carried young Ibrahim on her shoulders, teaching him the names of trees, and where his childhood memories were planted. This return wasn't just a personal journey, it was a vow that the past, with all its joy, pain, and love, would never be forgotten. Ibrahim looked out at the fields where children played tag and saw himself in them, an orphaned boy, loved by hands not bound by blood, raised by a community poor in wealth but rich in compassion. "You know," he said, his voice softening, "I've been to many places, met many people, but nowhere makes me feel whole like here. With you." Aminata took his hand, her callous palm warm, and whispered, "Wholeness isn't something you find out there. It's in your heart, in what you carry from those who loved you." In the books I've written, from My Sister's Keeper to The Pact, I've always believed the truest stories leave an open question, a space for readers to fill with their own experiences. Ibrahim and Aminata's story ends under the baobab, but their legacy doesn't stop there. It lives on in the Root of the Heart Foundation, in the stories of thousands of women across Burkina Faso who now step into the light to share tales of children they've raised, sacrifices they've made. It lives on in villages like Kuogo, where children grow up believing love needs no title, that a community can be family. And it lives on in those who hear this story, who begin to look back at their own lives, asking, "Who caught me when I fell? Who stood silently behind me, keeping me steady when I didn't notice?" Ibrahim and Aminata's journey proves that love, though obscured by time, always finds its way back. In Handle with Care, I wrote of how small choices can shift destinies. For Ibrahim, choosing to pause in that hospital corridor, to visit Aminata's home, to honor her before the nation, were the stones paving a greater legacy. Aminata, with her quiet love, planted the seed for a social movement where unsung women are recognized, where gratitude becomes a national value. But their legacy isn't just in tangible achievements. It's in how they remind us that family isn't defined by blood, but by moments of care, embraces, lullabies in the night. In Plain Truth, I explored how simple truths can untangle life's complexities. For Ibrahim and Aminata, that truth is, love is the root of everything, and when we nurture it, it blooms even in the driest lands. As the sun set, its last rays filtered through the baobab's branches, casting long streaks of light on the ground. The children still played, their laughter echoing like a promise of the future. Ibrahim and Aminata sat there, saying nothing more, but their silence was full of meaning. They'd found each other again, not just in memory, but in a deeper commitment, to preserve the love that nurtured them and pass it to generations beyond. This story, like my books, doesn't promise a perfect ending. Life, with all its injustices and challenges, goes on. But it promises hope that each of us, no matter our place, can sow the seeds of a legacy of love. Have you ever paused to think of those who shaped you, those who sang to you, wiped your tears, believed in you when you doubted yourself? And if given the chance, what would you do to say thank you, not just to them, but to the world? Ibrahim and Aminata's story reminds us that love, when acknowledged and shared, can change not just one heart, but a community, a nation, and perhaps the world.